Hello, I'm Linda Rogers, member of League of Women Voters, Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids area. I live in the city of Anoka and am happy to be visiting with state legislators from neighboring cities. I'm here via Zoom with Senator John Hoffman, Senate District 36, and Representative Zack Stephenson, House District 36A. Thank you both for talking with League members today. Our conversation will be posted on the League website so that members of our community might hear you as well. To all our viewers, League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government. The League encourages informed and active participation in government. We've done that for over 100 years, and that's why we're here today, to promote informed and active participation in government. Our questions today are varied and strive to address both statewide and local issues. They're in no particular order, and the legislators will take turns being the first to answer. But we'll start with a tried and true personal question. Senator Hoffman, what inspired you to run for office those many years ago?
Oh my God, Linda, do you remember I was chairing a committee, chairing a school board hearing, and the people from the US Bank or whoever that bank repository was in front of us. And I had asked a simple question because we had to borrow money. Do you remember we had to borrow money because legislatures did the old school shift where they said, we're going to pay the school district money, but we're not going to pay it now. Well, we might pay it in a couple of years. And we had to borrow, I think at the time it was $86 million, but this was like the second inquiry. It was $42 million. And I just asked a simple question, how much interest, at the end of the day that we would be paying? And I believe, Linda, it was around $450,000. And I made a comment, you got to be kidding me. That's 10 school teachers that they just took out. And so at that moment, somebody on the school board, and I don't know if it was Jerry Newton or somebody said, no, maybe you should run for Senate then. And I guess I said, I should, and I will. And then I guess that was that paradigm shift that occurred. It was like, you got to be kidding me. Where's the common sense, pragmatic, and leaving your ego out in the hallway motion here that should be running, our state governance and when it comes to that. And that's, I think, the pivotal point. But prior to that, seeing how Jim Ramstad ran as a congressperson and seeing people in my life, that had been in office and they had done it in a pragmatic and really, common sense way. And I thought, we got to approach it the same way. So that was the moment, Linda, and I believe you were at that school board meeting.
It's a great memory. Thanks for bringing that up. Representative Stephenson, it's been a few years now for you. What inspired you to run?
Well, thanks for that question. Thanks for having me here today and putting on this forum. It's always great to do these conversations. It's fun to do them in person when we've had the chance to do that. And I'm glad that we're doing it virtually this year as we are trying to get through the Omicron variant. I grew up right here in the northern suburbs. In fact, I live a mile down the road from the house I grew up in. I always say I didn't get very far in life. And, now I live here with my two little girls. In fact, my younger daughter, it's her 7th birthday today. My older daughter is 9. And when I first decided to run for office, they were 5 and 3. And I was looking at them and thinking about how much Minnesota and Coon Rapids and the North Metro contributed to the great life that I've been able to have. And I want for them and for all the kids who are growing up here to have the same opportunities that I've been lucky enough to have. And I was worried, and I still am worried about the future of our state and our local community. And I thought I could be doing more to make sure that Minnesota is as great for my daughters as it has been for me. And that's that guiding principle every day that I serve in office, is how can I make sure that Minnesota is a great place for kids to grow up in, just like it was for me.
Well, thanks to both of you for acting on those inspired moments. Now the questions might get a little harder. Looking ahead to the 2022 legislative session, what are your top 3 policy priorities and what associated legislation will you support? So Representative Stephenson?
Well, it's an important question because being in government is about setting priorities. I think I'll mention a couple here today. The first one, we do have, as everyone knows, a significant budget surplus. Right now, it's $7.7 billion, although we'll get another budget forecast in the next few weeks that will probably refine that number. But I think we can expect it will be a very significant surplus. The state is in very good financial shape, in part thanks to the responsible budgeting of legislatures in the past. But it's important to remember that a lot of Minnesotans are not feeling so good about their own finances. We're seeing inflation and rising prices like we have not seen in many decades in food and energy and childcare that are really hurting families. And so I think it's very important that we use that budget surplus to help the families across Minnesota that are hurting. I think it's important that we return a significant portion of it to Minnesotans in the form of either rebates or tax cuts or direct payments, and then also try to address some of the root causes of those rising prices in energy and food and childcare. I also think that we're seeing a significant rise in crime, again, for the first time in a couple decades. As a prosecutor, that's my job when the legislature is not in session. I work as a prosecutor. I'm particularly worried about public safety. I want to make sure our community stay safe. And so I think we need to be using some of that budget surplus to protect our communities from this rising crime. The second issue that I do want to mention, typically in even numbered years and in odd numbered years, the legislature sets a 2-year state budget. And then in even numbered years, we usually pass a very significant infrastructure bill, sometimes called the bonding bill. And I do hope that we will have a very significant bonding bill this year because we have very significant infrastructure needs. And I will be focused on those in Champlin and Coon Rapids, including finishing up the good work that we've been doing on Highway 10. John and I worked hard to get money to take all of the stoplights out of Highway 10 in Anoka and Ramsey, and that will be happening over the next few years. But this is the year we need to get money to put a third lane on Highway 10 from Hanson Boulevard to Round Lake Boulevard. That will be a top priority of mine. I also, I think there's another question later on bonding, so maybe I'll talk more about that later. The last thing that I will mention, I have the great privilege of chairing the Commerce Committee in the House. And the Commerce Committee has jurisdiction over liquor law and gaming law, which, while maybe not as pressing as public safety or bonding or a surplus, are certainly issues that people have a lot of interest in. We're going to try and pass a bill this year to reform our state's liquor laws and support our local craft breweries and distilleries. I also am going to pursue the legalization of sports betting. Every state that touches Minnesota has legalized sports betting. It's time for Minnesotans to have the same consumer protections and access to legal and safe sports betting that our neighbors in Wisconsin and Iowa have. I just think that no Minnesotan should have to go to Iowa to have fun.
Senator Hoffman.
You mentioned Iowa. I spent 10 years in Iowa, Zach. That was, that was pretty good.
That explains a lot about you, John.
Get them thumped. I'm here till Tuesday. Try the veal. Linda, when I first looked at this, you specifically were talking about what policy stuff, and typically on that second year, like Zach is saying, it's a bonding year, right? And that's when you really focus on the policy. The first year of a session is really, we need to fund our agencies, right? We need to take the money that we come in with the state, and we need to fund our agencies, including paying the school districts, right? And it's just unprecedented that our forecast, it's not money in the bank yet, but it's forecasted to have this $7.7 billion surplus, right? That Minnesota, that's the forecast. Already there's people saying, oh, now we got to spend it a certain way. Well, those, the questions and the notations that folks are having out there about what do you do with that money, right? Well, let's go back to policy. And I'm glad Zach brought up that ongoing conversation of the financial aspect of Minnesota, which we know $3 billion has to go right to the bank, right? And out of that, you're going to have a little bit of money that's left over. What do you do? There's folks that are looking at the unemployment insurance trust, which I think that comes through Zach's committee in the House. Is that correct, Zach? Is Commerce handles
Jobs.
that, or is that?
No, it's jobs.
No, it's jobs. Okay, so on the focus on that one, it's like, that's a pretty big chunk of change. It's some small businesses right here in Champlin, Coon Rapids, and Brooklyn Park are absolutely seeing, they got their their notice of bill payment and they're like, oh my goodness, it's double or triple what they paid last year, right? And then we come out of this pandemic, it's like, all right, how do we give relief to mom and pop small businesses right in our local communities? I think that should be a forefront there, right? But let's go back to policy, and one of the things that we need to do is there's the DWRS framework. It's a disability waivered rate services framework. It's about a $4 billion piece of our state's budget that pays for services and supports home health care, PCA, folks, grandpa and grandma living in, long-term care, short-term care, those types of things. We got to recodify that. That language needs to be recodified this year. And you might go, oh my God, what does that mean? Well, it just means that there needs to be some consistencies because it is a Medicaid appropriated funding stream, right, through our waivered services. There's going to be deep policy discussion on that. What does that recodification look like? And then aligning with the Department of Human Services and Department of Health on that. And so the other thing is there's also, when we did this ABLE Act in Minnesota, it allowed families to be able to set money aside into a trust that their kids could access without having to affect their benefit set, meaning the tapping into their services and supports from the Social Security Administration or from Medicaid. And so ABLE Act, which was established in Minnesota, we were one of the first states to really do that, which is to say, yeah, you could set up some kind of a fund, that grandpa and grandma can give to, somebody that might perhaps be on waivered services, and they would not be at risk for losing benefits, right? That ABLE Act federally, there was some changes to that act. Now in Minnesota, we're going to have to make our language, our policy language consistent with that federal piece of that too. And so the other issue is within workforce shortages, there's some policy implications and licensing implications that are keeping people from getting to work. We have unbelievable amount of workforce shortages in our long-term care facilities. Our nursing homes are closing their doors. They're we even had the National Guard come in because of those workforce shortages. A lot of that was due to pandemic, but prior to that, we knew that the silver tsunami, because the first time in the history of Minnesota, we have more people 65 and older than we do in the K-12 education system. K-12 education system has been pretty stagnant, 850,000 kiddos per year that are going to go through our system, right? Last year, 1.3 million people 65 and older. That's just going to get larger, right? And so the implications policy-wise are, what are we doing to assure our workforce shortages when you say, all right, well, I'm 23,000 workforce openings within long-term care, 20,000 within home and community-based services care. What am I doing to make that an easier transition or make the ability to do some kind of step ladder, career lattice there? So those policy conversations are going to be there completely. And I'll save some of the financial discussions for later on, but I'm glad Zack brought up Highway 10. Also, one of the things that Zack and I are going to be working on is the fire station in Coon Rapids. It's like Zack is absolutely going to take the lead on that in the House. So there's lots of things that we're going to do outside of just the policy work that hopefully will help our area like we've done in the past.
All right, and I'm going to sort of condense a few questions into one here because they're all related to bonding. You've talked about some of your hopes for bonding and specific projects. But the first related question to that is, as a result of the Keep the Water on the Land legislation last year, have any projects been started? The second question, and I can repeat these, but I want to give you a sense of what they are. Would you support having a process to assess and note the impact on climate change for bonding bills, similar to how we have a fiscal impact note for legislation? So kind of three bonding questions there. Your hopes, bring us up to date on the Keep the Water Land legislation, if any projects have been started, and the potential note on climate change for bonding bills. And see, John, I think you're the first to answer.
I am. Thank you. That's a big package there.
It is.
And we'll try to peel back the onions in it. It's so yeah. on the bonding side, really, Highway 10 is a huge priority. Zack and I worked collaboratively with other local legislators in the House and the Senate to take care of the the sides of Highway 10. And it was, Abler, Newton, me in the Senate, and our other colleagues that were part of it. They were all a big part of that. And the joking thing was last year during transportation and bonding, or just transportation generally for Highway 10, Senator Newman, who is the chair of the Transportation Committee in the Senate, said to me on the Senate floor, and he said, Hoffman, I'm going to tell you what I told Abler. I'm giving you one bill. That's what he said to me, right? And I smiled, and I immediately got on the phone with Jerry and Jim, and I said, so where are we at on who's the chief author on some of these? So we ended up getting three. So, one, and one, which was good for our area, because at the same time, those three bills, Zach was really pushing them in the House, and it was just, it was gigantic on that. The other thing, Fire Station 3 needs to be moved. It's old. It needs to be moved. And I know the city of Coon Rapids has got some money set aside, but there's going to be a gap in there. And Zach's introducing the bill in the House, and Jerry, Jim, and I will introduce one in the Senate to hopefully close that gap. And we'll see, even if it's one-time money. I mean, that's all getting in the weeds on something. Going to your clean water piece, when Minnesota did look at the whole riparian discussion, I was serving prior to this year. I was serving in the environment and energy, and I would have been able to answer your question, Linda, right away, saying, oh yeah, this organization's doing this organization's doing that, this organization's doing this. I don't know the answer to that. All I do know is this, that, hopefully our LCCMR work, Legislative Citizens Commission of Minnesota Resources, is using that as an actual spotlight to say, what are we doing to make sure that we're taking care of our water on the land, right? And we know for years we've had this discussion. And one only needs to look at a GIS map of where the Minnesota River and the Mississippi River connect, that convergence. Darby Nelson, and first of all, I want to say it is just absolutely a huge loss, a big loss to me and to a lot of people that grew up watching Darby Nelson do clean water for the state of Minnesota. We wouldn't have these kinds of actions that we have now with clean water. We wouldn't have these kind of actions that we have with keeping the water on the land in Minnesota if it wasn't for people like Darby Nelson, who made it not only a scientific priority, but a social priority. And, I'm going to go back and let me just reframe something. When I was first elected, G. Merriam and Darby Nelson sat down with me and they said, John, I think you should get involved with energy and environment, right? And I'm like, all I know is education and health and human services, Linda, right? I mean, my whole life's history has been in the education and human services world. But to just learn from those two and absolutely learn from Darby Nelson on what's really right for doing in Minnesota is absolutely embedded in my memory, and it's embedded in my heart. And I just have to tell you, we wouldn't have Keep the Water on the Land Minnesota if it wasn't for the leadership of Darby Nelson and what he started in Minnesota when he established all this stuff as a legislator and as a scientist. So I just wanted to make sure that point got out there, Linda, that we wouldn't be having these conversations. And so I wish I could answer your question directly about what are the progress out there, but I will absolutely keep an eye on it. Thank you.
How about your opinion on the note of impact on climate change for bonding bills?
Oh,
what do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we could also do too is, why aren't businesses, if they're using, remember the water gremlins piece that was happening, where you remember that whole discussion? Why aren't we having a look at, if businesses are using certain chemicals, why isn't there that listed chemicals, especially now that we're finding more and more land that is absolutely, has some problems because of the pollutants that have been put on there, right? Shouldn't we start looking at, well, if I'm a business, shouldn't I make it let people know in my community that are surrounding my business, oh, by the way, I'm using XYZ chemical, because number one, it'll put a transparency piece in there. Plus it will save our environment as well, because it will, those chemicals aren't being shot into the land because people will be aware of that, and people will be transparent. I mean, stuff like that you should absolutely tie to, because one thing we know in Minnesota, everybody likes clean water, right? And you don't have to get really scientific about why clean water is important, right? I want to fish in it. I want to swim in it. I want to have my boats in it. I want to have my fun in water in Minnesota, because we are the land of 10,000 lakes. We all want clean water.
Representative Stephenson, what can you add to this many faceted discussion of bonding?
Well, I want to start by joining John and recognizing the extraordinary life and career of Darby Nelson, who I think, looking at the list of attendees here, and I think all of us probably share a lot of affection for Darby and Jerry and the whole family and the great work and service that he did for our community, from the books he wrote, and I have both of those books on my bookshelf just to my left over here, to the students he taught at Anoka Ramsey, to the laws he shaped at the Capitol, and to the impact he had on our local community here in the northern suburbs. And I've been thinking a lot about Darby this last week, and I've been thinking a lot about Jerry and the great work that she does with this organization. And it's a hard time for her and for this group, and so I'm thinking a lot about both Darby and Jerry, and already missing Darby. But I think John hit a lot of stuff there, so I'll try and fill in a couple places that I would add on top of it. I agree with everything John said. I do think the climate fiscal note piece is a very good idea. The climate crisis is real, and we need to be kind of having an all hands on deck approach to it. So I think that's a wonderful idea. And certainly I think we should be prioritizing projects that not only help us on an infrastructure basis, but also help us on a climate basis, and also should help us with some of the inflation, rising prices. We had that huge polar vortex energy spike price, natural gas price spike back last February that we're all paying $20 a month for on our gas bills. We could ameliorate that by having local and clean sources of energy, not just with our electricity, but with our home heating. And in fact, I passed a bill last year, the Natural Gas Innovation Act, which gave our utilities tools to do exactly that, start moving away from our traditional model of home heating and towards one that's more local and cleaner. So I think that's a great idea. John mentioned Highway 10, and I did a little earlier. He mentioned the Coon Rapids Fire Station, which I also strongly support. The other bonding project that I'll bring forward relates to youth homelessness in Anoka County. There's a not-for-profit organization in Anoka County called Hope for Youth, phenomenal organization that works to end youth homelessness in Anoka County, which is a significant problem in Anoka County, and I think everyone needs to be aware of that. We think of homelessness and youth homelessness as something that happens in the cities. It's not just something that happens in the cities. It happens right here, and it's shameful that we allow it to continue. And Hope for Youth is a phenomenal not-for-profit doing great work. They're bursting at the seams in their existing facility. And so we're going to try and get them money to create another facility for them in Coon Rapids to provide services for young people who have no place to live. And that's probably my top bonding priority this year.
And for you again, the next question, what do you see as being the most important policy change that might improve our electoral process?
Getting the money out of politics. That's a no-brainer. We spend way too much money. Campaigns are way too long. The fact that we're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on local legislative races. I'll knock on people's doors and they'll say, "Oh, I saw that TV ad about you on TV." That's ridiculous that there's TV ads about state legislative races. I represent 40,000 people. We shouldn't be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on these elections. It's bad for democracy. It's bad for our community, and it's tearing the country apart. So we need to get the money out of politics and have meaningful campaign finance reform that probably requires a constitutional amendment, but it's just so important. The Campaign Finance Board here in Minnesota just put out a report a couple of weeks ago showing that not only are candidates spending the amount of money that a candidate like me has to raise and spend, is that at record levels, but what's really frightening is the outside special interest group money in competitive races dwarfs the amount of money that candidates have to raise and spend. So if I'm raising and spending $65,000, $70,000 outside, which is already too much money, outside groups are going to spend 10 times that on this race. That's disgusting. It's wrong. It's bad for public policy. and it's bad for our community. It's tearing our communities apart, and we need to stop it.
Senator Hoffman, can you weigh in on that?
Oh,
Most
yeah.
important policy change.
I love it. I'd echo and ditto what Zack just said, because it's, you know, you got to take that interest out of public policy because it's there. People become so polarized. And if you look at it, really running a campaign isn't about my values, my virtue. It's really about how can I undermine the next person. When I ran in 2012, 47 lit pieces were dropped against me in 2012, calling me a career politician. I just spent 8 years on the Anoka School Board. 4 years prior to that, I was in the Bush administration, right, under the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council. And it's like, all of a sudden now I'm a career politician. I was a public servant. Now I'm a career politician. 47 lit pieces. And most of those were from those outside contacts, right? And I could list them, and I remembered, I put them on a piece of paper. Who were those organizations that spent $250,000 against me in one shot, $125,000 in another? At the time, in 2012, it was like $660,000 or something that was spent on that election. That was huge. It wasn't as huge because my sister-in-law, she was the first House member to have $1 million spent against her. That was Yvonne Seltzer back in 2012. That was the first. And now, Zack, I bet you it's just, that's all dwarfed. I mean, it's a bad word to use. It's all, you know, not spotlighted because of the fact that, you know, we're spending $2 million, and not we, but outside agencies are spending, you know, upwards of $2 million on a campaign. Even our neighboring Maple Grove in Senate District 34, there was millions spent on that race, right? And it was mostly from outside agencies. That you cannot really then, your policy stuff, your value stuff absolutely just gets put in the shadow. Like Zack said, it's a 10-to-1 ratio. How can you do that when the narrative is being driven by somebody else? Get that out of our government election. Somehow we got to stop that piece from happening. And that's, I'm absolutely all in that one. And I'd like to see that happen.
Okay, and recognizing that, yes, this is a binding session, but policy change does occur. Senator Hoffman, what do you see as being the most important policy change that could reduce racial disparities in Minnesota?
You know, that is something that is being talked about in multiple facets within our legislative platforms. And then the unfortunate thing, it's happening in silos. It's happening in multiple facets, where if you really wanted to have that conversation, it's got to be an integrated conversation, truly integrated conversation. And it also has to be intersectional. And so you got to be able to say, where is this gap, and why are we not achieving that gap? Because when you look at it, you start to think, if a child who's very young isn't getting an early head start to the education system, why aren't we investing more in those early childhood programs? Yet at the same time, they say, well, all right, by the time a child gets to kindergarten, that person has not had that head start to it. So then we have to look at how we're doing other programs. But yet at the same time, that person might be coming from a place of food insecurity, right? And we know that exists. Well, you saw this, Linda, and so did I. And Zack, you know, when you graduated from Coon Rapids High School, you know, the amount of youth that were getting free and reduced public, you know, free and reduced food, the food nutrition services stuff was probably at 20%. And now, you know, we're looking like next door at Osseo, we're, you know, right up to the 45% factor. So if I'm thinking, all right, there's a percentage of youth that are coming to school with food insecurities, what am I making sure that should be a priority? The priority is some food stuff. Well, who oversees that? Well, that's the Department of Agriculture, right? That's food nutrition programs. What are they doing to be at a collaborative conversation? And so, Linda, I think if you're going to have all these spot bills out there addressing it, education is going to be one of them. But if we're not also addressing the mental health needs, which sits into the substance use and mental health umbrella policy, which is behavioral health, well, by the way, that division is buried in the Department of Human Services, right? How do you elevate that so it's at a level playing field so that they're having the same conversations at a cabinet level? That's a question that needs to be put out there. But here's the thing that it can be done. You know, for years, people talked about, oh, we're going to do collaboration and coordination. I'm not talking about collaboration anymore. I'm talking about integrated services. I'm talking about integration, which means you leave your ego in the hallway. You set down those barriers, those fiscal barriers, or in Minnesota, the silo. Everybody has a jurisdiction. You know, early on, I asked about the question on, I thought it would go through commerce. And of course, Zach said, no, it goes through jobs, right? That's how we operate in government. Everybody has its own little jurisdiction on where they do things. A note for that. I got on the call with Jim Ayler this morning because yesterday, the judicial branch just filed a search warrant on Feeding Our Futures program. Oh, and we were having a question, well, who has the jurisdiction over that? Because it crosses all sorts of boundaries when it, as far as you got kiddos that come from poverty, you got places that are providing through the Department of Education. There's a concentration of poverty issue in that, right? Well, who's absolutely the person that should be overseeing that? And in the way it looks, it's Department of Education. But guess what? The Department of Education has no statutory authority. It's a federal program. So all of a sudden you're sitting there going, well, wait a minute. It also touches some of the health and human services, at-risk factors that are in there too. Here's a prime example of where you need to have some integrated effort that's going in there. So however we look at it, Linda, which by the way, Anoka Hennepin closed the achievement gap for years. You used to do these reports. You remember that? And because we did the compensatory education model, which by the way is now, it was, finally factored in and paid for Anoka Hennepin and Osseo, is we found a way to close that achievement gap, right? And we tried to make that a statewide effort. It would have cost $200 and some million, but that went nowhere. It's like, well, wait a minute. Our own local backyard school district figured out how to close the achievement gap, and it could be a statewide matter. I bet you those statistics are still there, Linda, right? I mean, so regardless of where they do or what pops in there, it's got to be integrated, and it's got to have people saying, all right, I'm going to leave my ego in the hallway and I'm going to have a joint discussion on how we have to be a global aspect at this. Does that make sense?
Yes, and it leads us into our next question, which is about education. Do you believe?
Oh, am I not answering that one?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was afraid this was going to happen. Two people are hard for me to.
Right. No, no problem.
Wrangle it.
It's all
Please.
good. Just turn it into conversation. Zach, go.
I think we could do it where John gets all the hard questions, and I don't know why, because this is a tough one. Here's the thing about the question is, what's the number one policy item we could do to address racial disparities? And the answer is there isn't a silver bullet. We need silver buckshot. There's a million little things and big things that we have to do to address racial disparities, because they're embedded in almost every aspect of our government and of our society. You can pick whatever you want. You can look at the criminal justice system, the education system, the healthcare system, our economy, and you will find endemic racial disparities. And it's holding us back big time. It's morally wrong. John did a great job talking about education. I'll give you just one statistic. You look at Coon Rapids High School, where I graduated, and Anoka Hennepin, and the entire state of Minnesota, we've seen a major increase in kids of color, right? When I went to high school at Coon Rapids High School, it was probably 90% white. Today, if it's not minority, it's very close to that. At the same time, throughout the state, our teaching population has remained overwhelmingly white. Even as we've seen a rise in the number of kids of color in our schools, our teaching population is overwhelmingly white. And that is a significant contributor to the achievement gap, because kids need to see people who look like them in positions of authority at a young age to be successful in school. You look at our criminal justice system, it's, I think it's been well documented, the incidence of violence against people of color. They're more often victims of crime, and they're more often investigated by police. They're more often arrested. They're more often convicted. Every aspect of that, and that is deeply problematic. In our economy, home ownership rates are lower, and it's a deeply problematic. So we got to do a lot of little things. For example, last year, Minnesota became the first state in the country to require home appraisers, to take a course in implicit bias. And actually, that small change could have a significant impact, because statistics tell us that the same home that's owned by a white person is going to be appraised at a higher level than the exact same home owned by a black person. And think about the deep consequences in that for the economic well-being of that family, of that Black family, and their ability to pass wealth along to their children and provide a better life for their kids and grandkids. So small changes could have big impacts, but we also need to make those big structural changes. But I would be hard pressed to identify just one, because it's just such a huge problem that comes throughout all of our systems.
You talked about education as well, so I'm going to move to that question.
Sounds good.
Do you believe it would be helpful to require high school students to earn credits in civics before graduation?
I do. And I'll tell you, this has been a perennial topic at the Capitol, and I think there's been some resistance to telling local school boards what they have to teach. But I, especially in the light of the events of the last year, with the insurrection and the way that people are looking at our democracy and the danger that it faces, I think now's the time. I'd vote for that bill in a heartbeat.
John?
Yes.
Senator Hoffman?
Yes. No, Linda, it's always John, and it will always be John. It's I absolutely agree with Zack on this one, and I was as a co-author. Heck, I might have even been a chief author a few years ago when we were in the majority. But it absolutely is mind-boggling, and it makes so much sense, because it's really sad when you start to have an adult conversation and you talk about, and the background behind me is a 1905 photo of the Senate floor of the Capitol, right? That Capitol is absolutely a brilliant piece of artwork. It's a brilliant testimony to what democracy is, especially in Minnesota, especially in the nation. When you really look at it, there's a lot of firsts there. And when you talk to people and you go, have you ever seen our Capitol? You know what happens in there? They have no idea. A lot of people think that you're a federal representative, right, versus a state representative. Okay, those are simple pieces on that. And it's really when you hear, well, yeah, I toured the Capitol when I was in third grade, but I really don't know about, the Supreme Court, how the interaction between the House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court, stuff like that, really simple civics kinds of conversations happen. And so I would absolutely be a yes on that. And then here's the thing that comes up with our local school boards, right? They say, well, you're going to just throw another unfunded mandate at us. No, then we need to really have a discussion or a shift or a conversation about what are priorities. What are our priorities? For the longest time, people have been talking about, well, you're just teaching to the test. We go from having teachers being able to teach within their construct to then all of a sudden loading them up. I'll never forget, Linda, when the first time I went to a meet and confer in this presentation, and Zack, a meet and confer is when the teachers all get in the room and they talk about what's going on in the classroom to local folks and especially school board people. And you just had this conversation, and it was just an eye-opening experience for me, because here was this tenured, really awesome teacher who held up these 3 big, thick manuals and said, when I first started teaching, this is what I was, really honing my craft around to make sure that every child's outcome fit within this construct, right? And so you looked at that, and then he turns around, and here was this 2 8-foot tables chock full of all this stuff. I have to teach this to that standard. I got to teach this because of that test. I got to teach it. And he started going down that one, and I went, wow, when did we lose the paradigm, or when did we lose that aspect of how we going to allow teachers to be teachers again, right? And start teaching to the content of the kiddos in their classroom. And I saw really good, solid teachers that were really crafted at what they do, and they got caught up in the fact that somebody along the line was dictating to them that, oh no, now this is a priority, right? It's like, can we stop, take a little note back and kind of turn the dial and say, if we truly want desirable outcomes for children in our school districts and in our state, what is this priority? And so I know it should have been just a simple yes, but I'm going to go and say yes with Zack on this. I will absolutely support that big time, and then have the same conversation saying, what is it that we can just kind of peel back from and say, let's start getting back to our priorities of the global teaching of a child.
These kids have seen a lot of climate change already. These same kids we're talking about in high school, and they're going to face new challenges as they become adults and are involved in making decisions. What bills related to climate change do you expect to see? And what are their chances of passing in this bonding session?
Wow. I wish I was still in that I wish I was still in that on that committee, Linda. When a couple years ago, Zack Stephenson was talking about how the climate change is causing trees that are in Duluth. Zack, you better correct me on this, but I remember you telling the story of a certain tree that is absolutely shouldn't be doing what it's doing, and it was doing something, which was an indication that temperature's getting hotter up there, which means this type of tree is not going to be around. And I remember that saying, all right, what are we doing to assure that that's being taught within our new generation of kiddos coming through the school system? And here's what I found. Kids now want to be environmentally friendly, right? They want to be able to recycle. They want to be able to not waste food. And remember, Linda, when we were on the school board, or you weren't on the school, but you were in I just remember hearing stories of if you didn't have the money to pay for your lunch, then they would throw your lunch away, right? Those stories were real stories that were really happening. And then we heard that around the state too. And it was like, well, if I have my apples that are still in a closed container, why can't I recycle those? Nope, people were throwing those away. This is 15 years ago. Now today, that's a different story. There's a little bit more. The youth now today want a little bit more of proactive measures and want to be more conscious. I think that's a good thing for us, right? And so they're going to help push the envelope. They're going to push the needle for us.
Representative Stephen, what's your take on potential climate change legislation?
Well, I think it's critical that we do meaningful climate legislation every year that we're at the Capitol, because this crisis is only growing. We're seeing hotter summers, warmer winters, and devastating effects across the board, increasing extreme weather events like the polar vortex event that I already mentioned, devastating floods, severe storms, tornadoes in December. You remember those big tornado outbreaks we had in December? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that's happening with devastating consequences for our communities. The House is going to roll out this week a very significant climate package as a proposal for one of the things that we should be doing with the $7.7 billion surplus, investing across the board. It's not just an energy utility thing where we need to clean up how we get our power. Now about the most carbon emissions in Minnesota come from the transportation sector. So we need to be working to decarbonize our cars and trucks. We need more mass transit. We need more electric vehicles. We need to be working on the ag sector as well. That's the third big piece to the puzzle, and working to have less carbon intensive agriculture. I already mentioned the home heating work that we've done in the past around the Natural Gas Innovation Act. We should do more of that this year. And then, the best way to move forward on energy issues often is to not use as much energy. Conservation. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So we passed a nation-leading energy conservation bill on a bipartisan basis last year called the ECO Act, and we should do more. Help low-income families weatherize their homes, get more insulation out there, more energy-efficient appliances. That will save consumers money and help with the climate and create jobs. It's win, win, win. So all of that needs to happen. And watch this week for more news from the House in terms of how we want to spend a significant portion of the surplus on climate.
Well, thank you for that sneak preview. As a prosecutor, you'll have a particular insight on this question. What is your position on restoring voting rights to felony offenders who have been released from prison?
I support it. You're right. The most sober thing that I have ever had to do in my life is stand before a judge and ask a judge to send someone to prison for a lengthy period of time. To look someone in the eyes and say, you need to go to prison. for a decade or 2 decades. And consequences are important. Accountability is important. Protecting the public from violent individuals is important. But once someone has paid their debt to society, they need to be reintegrated into society, and they need to be. We need to move on as a society once someone has done their time and had their consequence and had their moment of accountability. Right now, our laws around felon voting are very confusing in Minnesota. The rule is that you can't vote until you complete all of your sentence, including not just time you're in custody, but time when you're on what people probably know as parole. We call it a supervised release, or if you're on probation instead of going to prison, you have to complete all of that before you can register to vote or vote. And the most common, we have very safe and clean elections in Minnesota. There's not any evidence of fraud. The only problem that we sometimes have is people think that they're allowed to vote because they've completed their in custody time, they're done with prison, and so they register to vote when they get out, not realizing that they need to wait to the end of their sentences. We shouldn't be punishing people for that kind of mistake. It's just wrong. So I voted for that bill in the past. I hope that we do it at some point soon.
Agreed.
Senator Hoffman, your thoughts?
Yeah, agreed, Linda. It started when I was early on to be able to vote for and actually be a supporter of ban the box, right? I mean, it was ban that checkbox that started this, and then restore, the restorative justice, restore the vote piece of it as well. It absolutely makes sense, and I'm glad Zack laid out, that kind of the procedural, when somebody's on parole, probation, or what is called sentencing. What was the word you used, Zack?
Supervised release. That's what we call parole.
Supervised release. Once you pay your debts to society, don't you think you should have the ability to start all over, begin anew, kind of thing? I agree. I agree with that, and would be honored to support it again.
Well, so many questions, so little time here. So I'm looking through our list of questions and thinking you might want to weigh in on this. Senator Hoffman, are you interested in changing the geographic composition of the Metropolitan Council? If so, what would your strategy be?
I got into that a couple years ago, Linda, specifically when it was looking at is how, because there's a huge debate out there, right? What should change, what shouldn't change? The regional access doesn't look like other states that have regional access, right? The tab, the transportation, the tab board, right? Those things like that. And there were people locally that helped me understand that no, it still makes sense the way it is. Here's the argument. Every time a new governor comes in, they get to pick the Met Council, right? And then so it's a governor appointed. And so the conversation was, well, maybe you do a half and half so that you don't ever get one swinging entity in there, right? Because the Met Council just isn't, about one little thing anymore, right? They're overseeing, if a restaurant has more exposure, more space, then all of a sudden you're paying an excise fee to the Met Council because now you have more space that you're providing a service to, right? You're looking at any kind of water, sewage, all that stuff that is outside, just the huge, larger metropolitan area. So, and on top of that, the Met Council oversees all the transportation, metro transportation, not only just for the metro, but also when you talk about accessible and barrier-free transportation, they oversee that as well. So they're become this large pseudo government agency, and everybody on that council is at the pleasure of a governor, right? When the governor comes in, I think that the conversation still needs to happen on it, Linda. So yeah, I think you lose aspect when you don't have a county representative or a city representative. You got to have your folks that are all, so-called stakeholders in this to be part of that conversation, which then the argument is, well, the tab board does oversee that, but yet at the same time, they don't have any statutory authority or jurisdiction over doing any governance. They just advise and assist. So yeah, I think the debate continually needs to happen. I'm still very open to what that could look like to make sure that it doesn't have politics involved in it, if that can even be done.
Representative Stephenson, your thoughts on the Met Council and its composition?
Well, the Met Council, I think, has on balance done a lot of more good than bad for our community. I think it's good to have a regional approach to questions like wastewater and transportation, rather than everyone kind of looking out for their very narrow interests. And I think it's served Minnesota well compared to our peer metropolitan communities that either didn't have these type of agencies or got them much later than we did. I have yet to be convinced that we need to do something like elections or appoint local officials or have staggered terms or change the regional balance. But like John, I'm open-minded on the subject. I just have yet to have a compelling case that we should change this. Typically, my sense of most of the time of the arguments is that people don't like the politics of the governor, the specific governor that we have, and so they wish there was a system so that the Met Council wasn't entirely appointed by the governor. And I don't think that's a particularly good reason to change the structure of the Met Council just because you don't like who the current governor is. I would take a longer view than that. But again, I'm open-minded, but so far I haven't been persuaded.
Thank you. Hennepin County has been in the news over 2 department heads who chose to work from California throughout their COVID shutdown period. Would you support legislation requiring county and local government employees to reside within Minnesota, except counties that directly border the Dakotas, Iowa, or Wisconsin?
Yes, I gotta be honest. I read that story about I think it's the library director, and I know there's another one, but I'm just kind of incredulous about the guy just be like, oh yeah, I'm here and I'm not coming back. And well, then I'm sorry, find a job in California. That's not the nature of public service. And yes, I would support that. Maybe there's some extenuating circumstance where we have a long tenured civil servant who has a family member in another state who's going through a health crisis and they need to be there for an extended period of time. I can imagine some exceptions to the rule, so maybe there should be some flexibility in the rule. But from what I've read about the library guy, it doesn't seem like it's anything like that. I think he just doesn't want to be here in the winter, and too bad. I'm sorry. Find a job then in the warm climates. That's fine by me. But yeah.
Thank you,
I'm
Senator
glad,
Hoffman.
Linda. I'm glad Zach pointed it was the library guy, but the one that really, right, Zach, the one that got me was the Chief Human Resources Officer is in Palm Springs, right? So you got the library dude and the Chief Human Resources Officer, and you go, okay, I get it. And to say I was the Chief IT Director, right? That's just making sure your computers are, and you can do that anywhere in the world, right? You could be out in Silicon Valley and have your chief IT person out there, because it's not a person-to-person thing. But your HR director, people, seriously, and the human resources director, I don't know, what's the first term as the director of what? Human resources. What are we all on the same page here? It's like, yeah, exactly. It was funny because we were at when AFSCME, they were trying to get some parity in their contract, right, with the county, and I was outside Hennepin County. My brothers and sisters, I'm an old AFSCME hack from Iowa, back when I lived in Iowa, right? And it's just like, I know the work they do, and there was an issue that came to mind, was like, all right, so I'm doing a min choices assessment, and I'm a social worker, and I'm a public health nurse. Well, the public health nurse is paid more in the county, but they're doing the same doggone thing, but they're getting more money. So I go back to the Department of Human Services. I said, help me understand this. Are there 2 different rate methodologies given based on your degree, something? And they're like, no, you do a min choices assessment. It's one flat rate that goes to the county for that min choices, because you're doing a min choices assessment, right? And so as I was doing that, just looking at and seeing why that's there, then it dawned on me that here's their HR director was out in California. You can't be a human resource, especially how many thousands of employees does Hennepin County have? And as a Hennepin County taxpayer, I was equally offended, Zach, absolutely equally offended, right? And granted, it's not an all or none kind of thing. If there's some other circumstances, flexibility stuff, at least notate that. But to be the HR director of the largest county in the state of Minnesota, and you're parking it out in Palm Springs, stay out there. So Linda, yes, I would say yes. When I worked for Polk County in Des Moines, Iowa, I had to live in Polk County. I couldn't live in another county. And so why not make that rule evident here? But here's the debate. Is that a local decision or is that a state? Is the state going to mandate that so that you locals have to do what they want to do? And, where's the flexibility involved in that? So I know it's around and round and round we go, but doggone it. HR, human resources, Palm Springs. No, move back, dude, or resign.
Our time is coming to a close, but I want to give each of you a chance to make any statements about an issue that we haven't touched on or something that is burning within you for this legislative session. Senator Hoffman, is there anything left unsaid?
Linda, it is always just a joy to be with you in the league. The league brings so much value to our area and has for many years. I'll never forget the first time. And Jerry Newton, when we were at some school district thing, and he seemed to know everybody. He'd say, "Hey, Kay," and he was like having these one-on-one conversations, and I was like, "Oh my God, who are these people?" And I realized, guess what? You guys are us. You're our community. We're part of this community, this great North Metro community. That's part of who we are. And I appreciate the league doing this and saying, all right, here's some information. And this also highlights that the people you place in as elected officials are you and me, right? It's us. It's Zach. And so, well, I think is left undiscussed is, there's some other great things that we can be doing in this area. And I look forward to working with Zach. I mean, we didn't talk about the north-south connections, Highway 47 or, 169. Zach and I have been working on trying to get some kind of, clearance, between Dayton and Armstrong and Ramsey, those kinds of conversations, they still got to be on the table because traffic is really terrible up here, right? And then also there's the Center for Innovation of the Arts at North Hennepin Community College that I'd love to see that be part of a bonding package coming forward. But other than that, I just am very grateful and thankful to you, Linda, and the league for giving us this opportunity to have a conversation. And I appreciate Zack Stephenson and the leadership in the House and being a partner here in Senate District 36.
Representative Stephenson, your last thoughts here.
Well, thank you very much for having me again. I appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who's watching. And thanks, John, for those kind words. And I enjoy working with you as well. And we've gotten a lot of good things done, and we have a lot of good things yet to do. I think we've talked about most of the big issues that are going to be coming this year, but I do want to emphasize an issue that I hear a lot about and that people are I think pretty focused on right now is the significant increase in crime and violent crime in particular around the cities as an object of significant concern. As a prosecutor, public safety isn't just a priority for me. It's my job. It's my profession. It's what I do for a living. And I'm very worried about it. I think we need to make some smart investments in law enforcement to curb the increase of crime, do some things with technology, but also human resources, because right now we do have a labor shortage in policing, and just like we do in a lot of industries around the economy, and it's having a significant effect on our local communities. We've been very lucky that our North Metro community has been, as long as I've been living here, a very safe place to live. It is a safe place to live right now. I want it to stay a safe place to live. And so I'll be very focused on making sure that our law enforcement have the resources they need to do their job correctly, while also making sure that we have accountability in that system, and that we are making sure that the bad police officers are rooted out of the system, but that the good ones are rewarded for their hard work. So that would be the only issue I think that I would add to the long list that we've already discussed. And with that, I'll just say thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you all down the road.
And also, I will say thank you to both of you, of course, for speaking with us and for representing our community interests at the legislature. Viewers, Check out our website for more conversations with local legislators at lwvabcmn.org. Thanks for listening.